Sangye Chetan Toki Chonam Chancho Pardo Dani Kakush Age Shinzo Gibe Tonam Dola Penjara Sangye Lopa Sangye Chetan Toki Chonam Chancho Pardo Dani Kakush Age Shinzo Gibe Tonam Dola Penjara Sangye Lopa Sangye Chetanto Kichonamla, Sancho Pardodani, Bhage Jinso Gibe Sonam, Dola Panjira Sangye, Deva Tamje Dung Dung Gi Gutan Tower, Simjan Tamje Mebe Deva Tam Rao, Simjan Tamje Niri Chadan Nidanda, Tanyam La Never Gurji, Simjan Tamje Deva, Deve Gutan Dembaraku, Simjan Tamje Dungal Dungal Gi Gutan Tower, Simjan Tamje Dungal Mebe Deva Tam Mindrawa. Samjan Damja Nirin Chadan Nidanda Tanyam La Nebara Gurji Samjan Damja Deva Devi Gudan Lembara Gurji Samjan Damja Dungal Tantawara Samjan Damja Dungal Mebe Deva Tamitawa Samjan Damja Nirin Chadan Nidanda Tanyam La Nebara Gurji Sajbi je me do Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kanya Tayami.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground, spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami.
관계 도중에 좀 다왔던 제 방배지를 담배ችን 던져 고담대로 차차로 야다 굴론데 다 죄되게 첨부리 아주 주인이 시초다 담당인 자상 된들로 지든 취계 정원들로 내가 첨부시부지 알아 된디가라 공룡 장주기 심기지 맞지니 도스제이나 시지치대 대진 취인디 아니 년법 년엔다 생긴 강갈로니다 즉 템베스메군에 나니지 세베이나 아니 취대 대진 취수도 그래 때마다 백하브레스.
So when we practice Dharma, when we listen to teachings, the motivation is extremely important. So we do not practice Dharma for the fame and for the names and for accumulating wealth. So this, if not be careful, and Dharma practice could go into 8 worldly concerns, which often can lead you into the wrong direction. So it is important to reflect yourself about your own motivation when you practice Dharma or when you listen to teaching.
당어서 셔럽길리우 대나니 다 오늘 개첨보 다 같이 녀몽이 녀보 연애면한테 공인적인데 동의도 다 와도 잘해. 대가서 이렇게 첨부 인바다 니는 수능도 갈라 차보래 카보래 또 스칼에 개봐도 내가 첨부를 했어. 동안 누구면아 동안들은 니술 가가라.
So in this chapter of the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Guide to Bodhisattva's Life, chapter 9, which is the wisdom chapter, is primarily focused on the wisdom of emptiness. And the wisdom of emptiness is the ultimate antidote for ignorance and suffering. And if you do not wish to be suffer, or you do not wish suffering, then this is a critical to understand. If you do wish suffering, then it's a different thing.
미 남자였나? 남자던 사람들이 무슨 법에 걸긴도 짜이나 나르장이나 주스야 돼. 미원이 남자지나 남자던 사다 디가나 던거래. 디가 남자지 던투이나 라유기 배 덴지 마리 버서기 베녀몬터서 라진기 파 갈래갈래 대캔 로야당 디네 디니 대화싱 대화 다 직다가서 서로 대화 좀 기루에 대화 좀 많이 봐 대화 님에 다 디단 주비에 순고하마도 때마다 커버래.
So as a human being, our human intellect need to be invested in reflecting on the understanding of this wisdom. And Tibetan saying that adage that the ions which stay strengthen and solidify, whereas the bronze can liquefy it when heated, when heat is used. So in a similar way, in our practice, we have to focus on practicing this wisdom. So it is not easy, but nonetheless, you have to put the effort in pursuing this wisdom.
당원에 레바니 와서 고물루룹당 파바 뜻답에 아리안 대화당 다 지와라당 좀바참 된데 내기 레바데 라본라보레 레바다 레빙원에 개발이요 말에 레바 배치 동상원에다 시우지 개발 차선래
레바 동상원래
레바 배치 동상
배치 동상
유스한테 뺐다가 개발 전부 차버려.
So our mind or our brain is not so much different from the Nagarjuna or Aryadeva or Shantideva or Buddha himself. So the difference is how we use our mind, and there is a really qualitative difference between how we use our mind.
비주 당상데 년초라 마당제 가서 두두 장초를 당네 미 양승스데베 푸냐는 뭐 상기 고방은 dir지 미데 때 dir지 때투야 탑실라 베스지디 디타마이나 코난조 타가나진 타네 상기사 페투브레 보다 때 때마다 가버레.
So how we use our mind is that if you focus on the positive in developing a positive qualities of yourself and aiming for the ultimate enlightenment, if you use your mind in that way, and the Buddhas and all the masters, Buddhist masters, they have used their mind in developing Buddha's mind, ultimate enlightenment. So if you don't use your mind in that direction, then it will be difficult.
또그 리츠시 다즉 소원 리츠시 된리지다 미 남자거예요 말에 기도 파파이나 제두고 리츠리츠지다 가서 답에 미 남자데 푸양을 뭐 삼당야 미 남자데 아니베 단다 즉 우크라이나 대화 진짜 치우질랑기도 된들 민로야게 몰람 순진이 잡네 남자데 양답에 던다고 등이 돈다인도등이 나다 신디도등이 나다 치민도등이 나다 때투 두야질 땅과다 뺀미스베게 침버리다요 다 오네.
So our human intelligence, just merely if you use it for just for your own food and shelters and just for merely for those, all your intelligence, and then we're not too different from animals. Animals can do that too, so they get there. But however, if we use our human intelligence in a manner in a right direction, even for example, the Ukraine conflict right now in Ukraine, if you have some motivation to do some dedication prayers for the and also not to have your mind human intelligence use in such a really a conflict. So it is important that we use our human intelligence in a right direction.
다 오늘 되게 맞아 몰람 순진이 잡죠. 가서 투투 대 용몽 대 귀기 다때 내가 연댕이 망무수 경이 유굴증이 강가라 대 귀기 용몽도 슈충으로 줘야 고가르전 뒷마다 잡에는 미쳐서 망부르고 거래 전부내라 제송도 강가 공파르고도 어다 뒤에 몰람 순진이 잡네 그 뒤에 대 삼당 거다 빼 미스웨 개체무치 통도스
메람디 가르기실랑한테 고쳐
몰람 순진이 게네 저기 다 마게알 구글적인 락넬랩 경에 연한다 마게바 무슨 주근이 연한다 저기 유기 녀몽데 파 마르갈데 충충도야게
메람께 건조기 미신 받은 들어왔다
미 내선데 충충도야게 삼당과도 뺏게 몰람 게나
소소가지 스고레 셴
맞아 당 맞아 대 몰람 되게다 건조 마경은 지어와 무술래간 준댕인다 구글쟁이 가갑지지라 프로젝트 구글쟁이도
나나나
어때서 그 녀몽도 슈충로이나 지디 지지길라 셈레 지디지다 때 현대 통화이나 마든 로그로 오늘 되게라 겨울부터다 니중도한테 조금갈라 ndemi송하다 때는 너야다 깨침버려서 숨도 그래서 깨침버리다 가서 낭바진 비선에 막아서 말긴 맞으잖아 가닝 말다 몰람 게마도 와서 레요 말에
So when you do a practice and prayers and dedicate your practice in and those who are indulged in a conflict in Ukraine and those around the conflict who support the conflict, just dedicate your prayer that their negative afflicted emotion be reduced. If their negative emotions are reduced, means they may less likely to indulge in such kind of conflict in the future. And these conflicts not only cause a lot of problems around the world. And so dedicate your practice in for them to reduce their afflicted emotions, which lead to such kind of conflict. So in your daily practice, dedicate your all practice and for those, so that such a conflict will not Yung do ero kislatanda.
그래. 가서 용으로 통한다. 다 삼중나 니지 미남다짱. 다 오늘 니지 고미 가야래. 다배 로친지 rollo sonda 두세. 다 니지 고미네 또 뱅기로.
Yes. So practice compassion. That I missed one more translation earlier. Sorry. And then His Holiness, when dedicate his prayers of taras and those compassion to these, dedicate to, we cannot do ourselves much in this. Really, we cannot stop these wars. It's out of our hand. However, we can pray and we can dedicate our, motivation for them.
당 말한 적은 내가 뒤나 융아 있음데 가서 툭툭지 상처를 걸 두야게. 따뜻한 배서 제로 제스다 주아게르마다 진짜 제요 말에.
So we can urge to dedicate your body, speech, and mind in helping others, sentient beings. Other than that, we cannot do much.
오다 당아서 알아서 다 드린 초고에 걸바데 다 동이 걸라 시거래 동이 생인데 가서 개첨부인 봐다 그상 로스가 셜로가 숨데 결세 뒤지지 엔도스네 로고스.
So today's for this whole subject is about emptiness, the importance of emptiness. So we'll review the last 3 verses we went through. So we're just going to recap a bit on those 3 verses we discussed last session.
다 그상 로그네 셜로가 다 숨나는 땅보데 빼게 전부 차거래 다 숨가에 삼다나 선 펜부시 얘기하지리 차디어래 간제 뉴모빈디바 맞었다 내가 뉴모빈디바 세데 아니 수수 뉴모센들라 셈랍도 마지와 셈 투버지바 라균된 간자데 지디 때네 라버정인지라 뉴몽시거라 뉴몽 셈 뉴버지바 셈 투버지바 셈랍도 미네버체긴 오다 텐데윈디바데 쪼쪼 란지 마리바니 도차제당 콩로 나이겔다 뉴모 기티지동 만 도찬체는 뉴모 기티지동을 같이 시거래 그래서 간가 뉴모 빈디바레스라고 알아.
So these 3 verses, all 3 important, and to go over that in the first one, we discuss about the afflictions and ignorance, and these afflictions are the root cause of the sufferings, and these afflictions such as anger, attachments, and so on. And there are 84,000 afflictions mentioned. All these are arises from the wrong view of conceiving self, the true existence of the self and phenomena.
다 진제 로데 은중 삼배진네 동이도벨 타와 냠렌잖아 뉴모빈 디바데 빵진 라조빈 디부터 거래스 돈다데
Contested the conchak from the
은중 삼배진네 코로알베 교시키 다 코로알 견도다네 코로알 마타는 타민도 산데 삼로데 루슉 총부지 깨바이나 되니 코로알 타라야라 코로 다 뉴모기 냠보데 사이로와 동이도벨 타와도 차대요래 이 에네베 은중 삼배진네 동이도벨 타와 냠술라나 디부데 라좀베 디부 코로알 롤투 거래스 라좀 디부 톱투 거래스.
The beginning with the first, you have to identify and you have to recognize the samsara as the place where all the suffering occurs, and the determination and motivation to renounce or renunciation of from the samsara is the beginning part. And with that, and then you will reflect onto what is the antidote, what is the way through which you can free yourself, liberate from that. And then the emptiness, wisdom of emptiness is the antidote for the renunciation will motivate you to take the path. And then actual practice, in your practice, the realization and training in emptiness is the antidote for the affliction and sufferings, in which ultimately will lead you into liberation.
다 시즌 리바스 해야 되라. 시제 시발라 porto chopa. Yani tamche kimba tobala porto chopa. Sangi kobang tobala porto chokindela shiji 리바스 gores. Kanji dinzin pachadang ninang tuwe chatezo ta ksanju imbas shitib res.
So obstruction of the true wisdom is it's the one that obstruct you from attaining enlightenment. And Karikari saying the
dinzingi pacha.
Oh, Tenzing Pacha.
Ninang tuwe cha. Dingingo tadunzi victima. Tate kuto kanga chagor.
So these obstructions are the traces that left behind of conception of true existence. And Tenzing Pacha, yeah, and then it's okay. And then is the delusional, the dualistic thinking of dualistic thinking. Yet.
Dingingo tadunzi victima. Zembangingo taderisa. Zembangingo jiro.
Oh yeah, okay. And then conceiving that two truths are two separate things, not one thing.
어때 저걸 시지디바 차리어레스. 다 니집 돌아때 배 빵카가 차고 왔다.
So these are the conceptions, which is the obstruction of the cognitions or the cognitive obscuration we discussed earlier. And this is the one more subtle and more difficult to remove.
다때 간디스 빵거래지다. 저기 동이도 따와대 장주기 셈기 짐바체네. 장주기 셈 냠는체 장주기 셈바진데 동이도 따와대 냠는체 바이나. 다 시립기념 동이도 따와대 시립기념 본로 두고 거래. 대마돈로 두고 말해. 내가 뭐지어래.
So emptiness, a practice of emptiness, in training the emptiness has to be go side by side with the bodhicitta to remove the cognitive obscuration, and the emptiness alone will not be able to completely remove the cognitive obscuration. So it has to practice along with the bodhicitta.
What at the end of don't Zamatombanyi said, Numon Panela, Zamatombanyi met mirore, Shiji Panela, Zamatombanyi met miroate, the menata, Tabjinda Yomare.
So wisdom of emptiness is essential for removing both the emotional and cognitive obscurations. Other than emptiness, wisdom of emptiness, there's no other method or skill that can remove these two obscurations.
Ta tabgisani lo nindwa sherab gechane to Zamatombanyi Chiganji Imbala, Zinjigi Lode, Ninjung Zina, Nyomumbi, Tongito Tawade. Nyomo nyambodro. Chanjugi semgizena shidipki nyambodro. Ti indigala nginjung chansem yanta pel tawa zede lamgizo namsum sigore.
Gwani chikson gishla de turoch samle shabat kodesh.
Tongi nginjung tongi to pel tawa de nginjung zina shidipki nyambodro.
Shid nyutumare.
Shid nyomo midiba nyomo. Nyutumki nyambodro. Ani chanjugi semgizena shidipki nyambodro. Ti indigala ta nginjung chansem yanta pel tawa te sumla lamgizo namsum sigores.
So
Lamna putu chungwa
so when emptiness practice along with the renunciation, which is help in removing the emotional obscurations, when emptiness practice along with the bodhicitta will become an antithesis or antidote to remove the cognitive obscurations. So these are the three primary paths in the path to enlightenment. The skillful means of renunciations and bodhicitta and the wisdom of emptiness are the three right views.
Nimbuchi del Tanginjina, Jerumbuchike, Lamsonum Sums, the Pejaj Zurtuare, Nunuji, Salkatun Kachire, the Peke Chambertanda, the Sholoka Digete Tingdua. Peke Chambore.
So if you are interested in Lama Tsongkhapa's teaching of three principles in which it mentioned more detail on this subject.
와다 대인디갈다 동이도 곰고래 동이데 답에 곰고르세 됐다 이제메데 순고 말와다 고 맞아 녀몬도 그 말에 둥알도 그 말에 둥알 만드는 둥알 빵거 빵에 탑람 다 뭐인데 동이도 타와인다 대 소리 배 대곰고래 탐지김베도 고방도나 대곰고래 세데다 대 님부지 숨은 것도 왔어.
So earlier, Lama Tsongkhapa's actually the text is the three principal aspects of the path. So in that, and so if we do not wish sufferings and to wish to be free from suffering, and the training and practice of the emptiness is a must and essential, and there's no other way to be free for yourself from the suffering at ultimate sense.
와다tere 다 니바데 쇼르가 니베톤 다데 간지 랭키기 딘지 마리 바데 땅오네 녀몽 깡가 찡인데 뒤차디어레 돈다데 베 랭키기 딘지 마리 바데 코로에 자와 째겐데 데레 토시비 때문에 만냥 약간 저게 버도 찡인데 뒤차디어레 좋아 오다 띠기 둥안 탐지 짱거다 베 라베 설마즈베 둥알니 인제네 소토에 그 둥알 버도 둥알 용수서 바티기 짱거 뭐 코투디어레 디인디가라 뭐니 전에 지나잖아 머리 버들레 지니 머리 베 텐달 저거지 차거레 에세 라거다 던다 뭐마데 딜라네 마타 버체네 송니라데 베 송니도 둥알 지제레 머리 베 님보레 머리 바 매차르 머리 발라타 고 유진요 마레제 숭고르다데 베 차보숭도 때문에 뭐저 삼로연 양양도 땅고에 자기도.
So and the second next verse is focused on basically the false conception of phenomena as a true existence, which is the root cause of all the suffering, all the pain, all the ignorance. And therefore, all the suffering included just from merely starting from prick of a thorn or something on your hand to the suffering of the fear of death, all this range of sufferings, human suffering, the root cause is this false conception of true existence. So it is since this is the root cause of suffering, this conception, this false idea, false view is the one that you should be fearful, not the emptiness. Emptiness is, on the other hand, is the antidote for that false conception. Wisdom of emptiness is the one that remove and that false, or clear that false view of true existence of phenomena.
어떻게 인도가 오늘 디 뺏게 침버다. 오늘 맞죠? 다 동리도 벨타와데 말아줘다 대분도 마선 차거라. 대분 남된정인데 소리지대. 다 딜라 뭐저 짜낭 제거해요 말다 뭐저 배 가서 툭툭지 삼로당 제빠제 제톱기 장야를 마다 제빠 맞다 동이 시야배 카브레 뭐다 그상 음악이 좀 봐 동촌에 삼당에 망보어래 디니 땡들기 돈다데 시고야 초니가는 삼당과다 빼면서 개침버리.
So this wisdom emptiness is, since there's no reason to fear for all the wisdom of emptiness, it's on the other hand is the one that remove the actual cause of suffering. So we have to look at emptiness. You have to look at emptiness from there's two aspects of looking at emptiness. One from looking at emptiness, and other from looking from the dependent origination. You have to look from both aspects, and these things can be understood and realized through a critical analysis, a repeatedly critical analysis and examinations. So this is utmost important to have repeatedly, intellectually, and through intellectual analysis.
다 서로가 타마데레 다 세대 추투버지 율문이 연대겐지 텐디지나 고 오늘 다 수두버지여이나 자들 따원다 따나 따린 저거로 어다 때나제 다 수두버지나 골베 지고야지레데 다 그런데 라진이 모두바레 율응은 매바레 수두도 요마레 데니가라 라진이 매 내겐지라 지고 유진 요마레 다 떤다데 뜻은거래.
So the next verse is basically stating that if there is a existence of the self which is which exists through its own essence, and then it is reasonable to fearful of that. But if you analyze and look deeper, you will see that there's no such self that exists through its own essence. Since there is none of that, there's no reason to be fearful of that, since it does not exist under deeper analysis.
자자 다 라진지 매라거마 매셀라거 말와 라진지 자고다 가르잖아 어떤 낭도 수투도 현라 마트버서 어떤 낭겨래 낭나진 생겨래 디니티가네 백 파저데 즉 나서지나 때 딱받치 뭐치기 걸어와 제사 그 그거는 요말 코나 라진디 요말을 라두가라 직들이 딱받기와 딱받이 게라 파저리 지두야 작도.
So the self or the others in this case exist nominally. They do exist conventionally, but ultimate analysis, if you look at it, the self does not exist on its own through its own essence. There's no ultimate. In ultimate sense, there is no self or enemy who is out there which has its own objective existence. That kind of self does not exist through analysis. So when you look at the enemy, looking at enemy, you're fearful of your enemy. But if you are able to look at the enemy through the lens of emptiness, understanding that such enemy does not exist objectively out there on its own, so there your fear will start diminishing and start reducing.
sabjing bada zogor das 공원에 가잖아 탈바좀 터버는 배경 동이 또 고버도 봐 세대다 중내 전부 살아.
So with this verse we finished the second subject, which is if desire to be liberated, even just to be desire to be liberated from samsara, is important to practice emptiness, or importance of practicing emptiness if one desire to liberate it from samsara. So that important subject is completed with this verse.
벤네 첨보로 말하죠. 동 친환기 개발돼 따외고는 제야. 겸되고는 제야 니용 거래. 따외고는 제 용도가라다. 배 통규 투무만 임베 동이 참이 돈다데 이 다 시고데 백내 첨부 작도 왔어.
So if you distinguish between the Buddhist and non-Buddhist philosophy or philosophical view, and there is a difference, and the first can be distinguished between Buddhist and non-Buddhist is taking refuge. But in the deeper level, it is a philosophical or metaphysical level, it is the understanding of the emptiness.
자원무시 성구도 스러와. 친환기 개발 시도가라. 겸력은 시야 되나 따외건 시야. 때는 따외건 왕분 노부터니 나 따외건 시야 때 빼면서 개침버리서 숨도 쓰는 덴진 숨고 시야버리서 까는 것도 없어.
His Holiness have emphasized that when we introduce Buddhist metaphysical view or introduce Buddhist doctrine, Buddhism can be introduced based on the taking refuge and also based on the metaphysical view. And for those who are at the higher intellect, it is really important to understand and introduce Buddhism from the metaphysical point of view.
근데 누가라 딱 오니 맞았다 남바 인도너라지니 팽겨 말해 남바 공이나 남바 챌린지나 야네 남베 tumu mayimbe zapket tawegoni pe ranjimepe tawateke nyomgo nyembol kandis ndogudo nyomoteki du kandis tegidu teso shegura teso shenatini chik to twade jiligirwa.
So if one identify as a Buddhist, it is essential to understand the philosophical view of the Buddhists about the self and the lack of inherent nature of the phenomena and self. And with that understanding, and then there will be some really deeper understanding, you will find there's some joy, or you'll find some more motivation to pursue this doctrine further teaching.
Wata tindi ndigala kunjin janje besungore tunta zawe nala al zalte jinyul ndungo chinangni sirwa ta zadu tavel tawade ta pe zembar tuwa khelinge pe njo pumbul tonjime zaj majana zembar denduchi ja majana njo michigan degil chirol bas pumbul tonjime za yo mare njo shingindela za ranjingi motoba za 추두는 뭐르버지 저 생에 ranjimebe tawa chimacho tawa thamota thangu tumo imbil tawa ta chagore tin jo singindala ta nangba sigore.
Omniscient Jamyang Shepa stated in his rude lines on classical Indian philosophy, he stated that Buddhists and non-Buddhists can be or are distinguished by their metaphysical view on the self. Non-Buddhists affirm the objective existence of the self as a permanent existence, and whereas the Buddhists negate this self, Buddhists negate this self-grasping view. And so that is the distinguish between the Buddhists and non-Buddhists at ultimate sense, is whether one affirm or accept a self as an inherent existence, or one does not accept self as an inherent existence.
자르무치 순주지 거디 고투나 추딘지 제신 낭충 모터 인저 순구레 이 순디가라 양네 텐딜 좀 다데 양네 란지메 벨타와 베 동초네 란지메 멤베 메산테소 nem부지는 데식 존난 그래.
His Holiness, when he introduced Buddhism, he will either spend at least an hour on teaching on emptiness or the lack of inherent existence of the things in nature, or he spent time on introducing the dependent origination of the things and phenomena.
어떻든지 늘라 가지고 다 시럽기 리우데 차장 다 원본 넘베 온데나 나제 모터 랑 차대거다. 다 모터 마터 수수 준비를 라래 버려.
The whole 9th chapter is, in a sense, is the introduction of the Buddhists at the more profound level. Whether this was introduced or not, it depends on the subject who is listening or who is practicing.
다음에 또서 슈갑 두스체나 란지 맞아 너 차지기 되가라 파기 너제 길이 율문 수투디어 봐 이동와 시부진 너차 코란바에 모든 뒤로와 미바즈 이동하라미 넘바 랄거에 넘바진 진리 동알케 땡쳐봐 라거다
권위식 손도 그럴까요?
미바즈 이동하라미 다 주드베 닌지부 송거와 주데 율데 미바즈 이동하라미 넘바데 달카보 다베 주데단 수수시바데니 ते मजून डिग मिदु संदे तो राल खाबो आ रहा था थामा दे पे देवा जीवन डिगो आ रहा था देवा यों बार चली तो कार्य हो रहे दुंगल के वे तेंची गिरे लग रहे
दिसुमरा
ते सुंदर था दशा गंगो तेरे दशा सिंगी तेरे ता कंडरे जी दूते दशा
So when we find desire arises in our mind, and instead of letting desire to take control of you, What we do normally is that when we find something object that is desirable, and we perceive that object as objectively existent out there on its own, without being dependent on other cause and condition around, and that lead to, there are three things that occurs when we perceive things in that nature. The first is that we just perceive that object of desire as our focus on, fixated on that. And second is that, and once you're fixated on that, means it is difficult to dissociate your mind from that object of desire. In the ultimate sense, it becomes the source of suffering and not a desirable. So these are the three processes that's going on in your mind when you look at anything that is desirable, and then you will see things in slightly different perspective.
nempoche samdang gore te samdangina tini ko samdave dumdeji tungure ta sammadana samdang yan pe yang yandu kulcha temba masuna garojini jengi wandu soneni pe pame chadugo.
So this need to be repeatedly practiced, and you have to think critically on this and repeatedly investigate. If otherwise, you will be fallen into the trap of your own thought, and then your own action leads to or controlled by that thought.
Moneta jamdende dena sungyote dembarata kanji kenleke ba temai teni hewera yoma kinla rale kan tongbarchi tingi tongi shena payo insu sumuda tongi shenas tongi sheba ina ta pe yulungoni mebade pe ta dainanda 제당 계속 유리나다 차바 계속 유르고 그런 원에도 빼 수도도 매아지 시용도 갈라 바이오 랑징 차그리도 숨어야 되고 오늘 된 말에 디 중들이 양양 되던들 양양도 삼당에서 빼미스고 개침 버려
돈이 돈을 바이오 중을 쓰라야 돼.
디지 돈이 세나 바이오 인스 바이오 차그리스도 바이오 바데 동이 세나다 빠빠요 양다바 차그리스 거라 주마전지다 동이 마셔나 나서 주마다 미다 버르지 인도도 징임준데 저 두르와 다때서 많이 봐 동이 세바 있나다 코 견지 통네 니치도 갈라다 녀모를 지르고라
So Buddha has stated in his sutra that if you understand and realize the wisdom of emptiness, and then the deeds, all your actions become virtuous actions. And the reason is that once you realize that, you will clearly see the negative actions clearly, what is not there, what is the reality in there. Once you understand the elements, all your actions become a virtuous action. Do you believe this?
What दूसरे कांचन दो दे माटे बिजबन दोरे 루이야보 마저 비시면 도래 도대 딱 고서 가상만이 담에어래 걔나서 양양도 삼당 걸 다대기 지 거기 사퍼라면 저 사퍼나지 말했으로와 삼당에 돈달 담에레스
도디타 니 거긴데 왜 티
마저 비시면 도래 내 땅갔다 나요 땅고
게임도 땅 인지토는 어디 심었다 디 거기
게요 말
로스라 아니 컨데스트다 디 간시
도디 키라도
게바테 테마슬라다
마저 비시면 도대 마저 비시면 도래스로와 간시 켄레케 바 테마키 간시 켄레케 요디 라완 추두두 케요 마레스 켄레테니 케로와 테니 케베 란신 요마인 केवादे कोई क्या लगता है उधर छुटू तो रांझिंग की टुबाल जी के यो मारेस क्या लगता है राले बेजी ना रांझिंग टुबी तो मारेस कांची तो निचे ना पायो इंस ताते इतने दूर निधि तंगो
the Johnson they do kishla. And so in the sutra Buddha has said that things that arise from cause and condition cannot be arisen or cannot rise inherently. That which is dependent on condition for existence, it is known to be as emptiness. And thus one who has realized emptiness has the perfect conscientiousness.
What didn't you call a curiosity? Ningot about teeny. You do something Chivaina? Didn't have race.
So it would be if you write these lines and put it in your paste it in your room or somewhere near, you can see that, visualize it, understand it, and see that more and in your daily practice.
Kampajima de Omara, when you know laws in Shanatini, Kavanduna, Chick Namdan, then they cancel Chatugalati, the laws in Tela sometime, sometimes these are countries into some half comida.
So it's only 4 lines. If you can memorize these 4 lines, and so whenever you just get, for example, stuck in the airport, and you have time to see, means then reflect on these lines, and you will not even realize how quickly the time goes. And
the mother Namthalam tried on best suit con ziput in a garage Namdu cancel chat and each other lung she wish lung take it off. So which we do.
There are people who are coming with the ties and necks and all well attired, but when they see that their plane is canceled, and they get really frustrated, and you can see that all the emotions, negative emotions right there, exhibited there.
And that they don't get the demo, Dindila to sometimes you said the Suzula Yundenja Kunichera.
So if
you said that Tolamando.
So in those moments when you're waiting for example, in the plane, and so if you just memorize this line and reflect on while you're waiting, and so it's becoming 2 things. The one is that your time will go quickly without frustration, and at the same time it become a practice too.
Can you say the 4 lines for us again?
4 lines. Things that arise from cause and condition. I would say it slowly, if you can write this down. Things that arise from cause and conditions cannot be arisen inherently. That which dependent on condition for its existence is to be known as emptiness. Thus, one who has realized emptiness has the perfect conscientiousness. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly, the last one. I have always difficulty in pronouncing that word.
What I think it's the current TG laws in Yang and the Samadana, Tini Kansamji Muni Samadana, Sangi Chile Muni Juguru, the mother Kabore. The mother was a Vagan Chulu than Rabban and Degimare.
If you repeatedly reflect on these lines and try to understand the meaning of the lines at a deeper level, and then it will certainly bring changes in you. Otherwise, if you don't, means then it will be like just pouring water on a rock, and nothing much will happen. If you pour water on a rock, means it will not go into the rock. It will just flow down superficially.
TG composition, DJ, some mother tea composition, then Navi Navina the Chinja and Yaldure cake.
If you don't reflect on this, means then it will just, you hear these words and then it just goes into your head and then it's gone afterward. There's not much difference will happen. However, if you reflect in these and more and deeper level, and then you will see it changes, transformation in your mind. Meditation in Tibetan is gom. Gom means familiarizing yourself. So you do this repeatedly reflect on that, when you become familiar with this.
Any 섬중기 시랍게는 했더니 곰중 캐럿 다 쉐바 잠긴 리가 말해 고쳐고 말해 배 곰중 시랍게 어느 대 절지 곰들라 절지 되니 절면기 녀와 맡은 버도 곰고거다
절매스 그래.
매질 좀 먹었다 그러지 너무
절.
수기 깨운 거라
So when we wisdom, the first start with the wisdom of hearing, you hear the word or teaching. So when you hear that, it's the wisdom first is hearing that. And second is when you think on what you heard and repeatedly think about that, try to understand it. And understanding is the second wisdom of understanding. So understanding is not enough. You have to familiarize you with that understanding to have a direct experience of your understanding. So this is the one that these three parts are the one that need effort. And then once you experience it, and then it becomes effortless, you don't have to put effort there because you have become an experience of that. Until then, you have to follow these things: wisdom of hearing, wisdom of understanding, and wisdom of familiarizing yourself with the understanding.
저 겐더스 순고를 터성
Yes.
Excuse me, Tashi. There's a little bit of conversation on the chat. Several of us couldn't get all of the last two lines down from the four. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah, sure. So the last two line is that which dependent on conditions for its existence is to be known as emptiness.
태성금수 야마트라바죠. 땅 투비돈데 렘상 삼무단돈데 렘상 배 꿈디 때는 오미께 되게 첨부지걸 태성금수 야마트라바죠. 그래서 nem부지 숭그리 겨울무지다 접지 남바니다 맞아 배자팅에 겐 강갈로는 숭그리.
태성금수라.
tö바 삼바 곰바숨 야마트라바죠. 그래서.
Yeah. And so His Holiness and other teachers have repeatedly said that these three way of learning, practicing, so first is hearing and then thinking to understand, the hearing to perceive the teaching, and then thinking to understand the teaching, and then the meditating upon it to develop the experience of that teaching.
다때 개첨부도와 동이도 배타와데 오늘 개첨버 다때 삼당과데 다 제코 단단 코 가르스나 뉴무도 수수 중로야데 다 중망변 순거와 다 중로야데 때니메어라 동이도 배타와마다 본인데 동이도 배타와마다 전다요마다 본인보.
So affliction can be reduced by different methods. There are other methods to reduce, other practices, but to remove it completely, and there is no other training on practice than practice of emptiness.
배는 유무 지천이 간사가 다음에 라파좀 오험나 유무 간사가 다음에 라파되게 유무 슈자 투그래 빵 투그래 저는 빵 투고 말해.
So when you practice the selflessness of an individual person, inherent lack of inherent at a grosser level, it will reduce that grasping of the self as a person, but it will not completely eliminate or remove it.
된디가라 뉴몬테니 바라 배 가서리 동이 참으시 거리서도 님부지 두고도 다대주 양양도 로고에 깨빼게 첨버다
유모짬에서요.
뉴모짬에서라 배 동이 참으시 고레스 뉴모 참으 빵만 바나 용 말레스.
To completely uproot the afflictions and ignorance, understanding the subtle level of the wisdom of emptiness is important. It's essential, actually, rather.
다들 계산이 저래다 다간지 계산 저겨나네 다 계란수 솔로가 가바도 디주 그상 맞아 뭐저 지제 봐. 보다 되게 돼 양도 다. 되니 나세기 서군디 나라 간데 노 직다투나 배 미스베 펜도용 그래 개진용 그래 아니 수수 가반에는 직다나 다데니 삼다데 데이나 아니 직 뉴몽 라 또선 돈렌체 두그래 때마다 가보래 뉴몽 세는 가서 로콤바슈 춤배 와라 토마메 받는 꼼데겐지로.
So going into this subject, there are different sub-subjects and groups, and that we have discussed earlier. And so going into these each subject and understand what the different part of the subject, and then reflect and practice on these, and that will help you in fighting the afflictions and ignorance. And it is not easy to completely fight against these afflictions, because we have this for from the countless lifetimes we have, so it is not easy to be removed.
That's our subject sumba. That don't need to jiggy riba give us a bath. That don't need the tendency get chamboina. That don't need the that Hamoko conjures don't need to jiggy riba jora. Don't need the catch ribata. Yivajin sunguin so sunguara.
Subject 3, now we're starting with subject 3 is focused on how to practice emptiness, and that the framework with a logic and reasoning how to practice emptiness.
Takasan dying was a dingy schedule along a young mamboine, see tumbu mamboji curious, Mountbana Jule Pentogrisani. Green bass. That young Deche Yongre, the tango de Inatezo, Chick Canazo Casante Diana, Logan that and Pendo Yongres.
And then correct.
The Kazan the Nisha Digala, Goni. Tumbu Mambo is courier, Conso.
Tumbura, okay.
Tijet and Mambo courier.
So when at the beginning of the chapters, when I was explaining you the two truths, at that time I've sent several different lines and verses on this subject, several of them. And if you have those, means just read those and again, try to understand and think over those lines repeatedly.
Yeah, that Kanzaka Tungi to be riba Gebrashibata Niji. Kanzaka Dame Ribatan, Chugi Dame Riba Gebrashiba City, Nido. Ta Kanzaka Dame, Ta Chugi Dame, Ali Riba Mashegona, Tangu Umatangu Lula, Kanzaka Dame is in a country cigarette. Chugi Dame is in a country cigarette, Tadekajete, also Chiklingos.
So starting with the establishing with the logic and reasoning, how to, validity in practicing emptiness. And we start with the two. One is the selflessness of individual or the self of the person, and the selflessness of the future, phenomena or the aggregates.
Tadi Karsore Jiga Bendewa ta Yabendewa de Leuven Tawan Trabinze Sakon Dewa GRS Roa Kasan Curious Tina la Karsure Tela Daja Jawani Kanjin openum Gishela Ram Malepe Ngote Rajinte Temepana Dame Pao Site Kanchi Da said the Rajin Sikarzo Mazo you'll pagin Sutu Diowajinangores. That's Tela and be Sutu Nayajore. Dinangende Ta Gachidate, so the me to Southern Gachidate Chagores. Don't need to Ribe Kayagi, that the Chagore. He mets Lagores.
Los.
They may Panadame Paos. They may in tutu the nang nanjinji me insa la yo marese lab go res tela kansa ga dame tang kansa ranjingi matubade kansa ga dame chi ranjingi matuba punso lo soba chi ranjingi matubade chi gi dame dus sigore ta kansa ga tangyu lula kansa ga dame ta chi gi dame tebe jung salcho jin di cha di orda 니게 계상만 구리 계속 삼당로지 니 계상만 유하게 인스 바제 계속 삼 간지나 가시
So I have sent this verses to you all. I hope you have read this, and this is from the Chandrakirti's commentary on Aryadeva's 400 verses, to establish or to explain the selflessness of the individual person and phenomena. In this, it states that here a self is an inherence or the nature of phenomena, and that is a non-dependence on anything else. The non-existence of such self, inherent self, is selflessness. So in a Buddhist Prasangika system, this we have the object of negation is this self, that inherent existence of self that we conceive as self that we conceive to exist objectively through its own essence rather than imputed. So that is the object of negation. So in the establishing the first way of looking at selflessness is you have to understand what is the actual object of negation, what we are trying to negate. So that is the inherent self that is objectively existing on its own nature is the object of negation.
Da sidula tanye bedaji yore roa gaje daji yore da me sid da de gaji da res tanye bedadi yore ta va tang nga tang kansa sid tunchi lagara jungangane ani ta tanye bedate ko daji pumbo jiam ngala thene tape ngaji tap pa min ta zamji tanye ta zamji dumde genji las tanye bedate lagara ngaje da azu chuchu도 요바 한 버기니 유능은이 요반지 낭나지 ngazu 징거래 된다바데 요 말을 라거래 데 기반도 가시.
So when we talk about self here, self has to look into two ways. And the one is a designated self, which is nominally imputed or existent, which is imputed to the transitory collection of the five aggregates, and that self exists conventionally. However, such self cannot be found if it does not have its own essence. So there's a two difference between that. This conventional existent self, which we call it I or mere I or self, which exists conventionally, whereas such self does not have its own essence. They don't exist as own self without being imputed. So there's a difference between these two. One is nominally existence and one is inherently existent, two different things.
띵이 개발은 제 마시나? 띵이 지도주나 때니베 유해싱인 매싱인 토민인가요, 레스.
If you cannot distinguish between these two, then it is confusing. Then it can be confusing to think what to negate and what to affirm, or what to negate rather more than affirmation.
다 배작하시는 가 군소배다 하라 그래, 당예배다 하라 그래. 이 가래나 군소배다 이나라 당예다 이나 맞아 민따스 지지라. 아니 파기 그 유능원이나 나서도 딱 와야민도. 그 나도 다 당연히 딱 인상 당연히 자와도 제두거라 당연히 원기 배낭알 엄마마기 계산이는 알때 성라 주고 짐바선남라래 짐바선은 민다 따니 짐바선은 그 자와카리 륜굴려 게다가 말이야다가 짐바선은 자와 차거라 왔다 그 뒤인데가라 된다고 열어와
So this nominally existent, the name, the self, which is conventionally exists. In some texts, it is mentioned as a conventional self or nominally existent self or whatever designated self, whatever term is given, that self is not object of negation. It is there. So for example, when I was born, given a name designated as Chimpasunam, and the Chimpasunam existed, and all the functions and things that I do is part of the Chimpasunam. Such self exists conventionally. So this conventional existence of such self is not denied. However, there is no inherent existence of that self. If there is this self exists on its own, so there's no reason to be given a such designated name, such term for that.
다 임바선은 파기니 가사전제 따용다 수톱도 나와. 깰라마테버 나와. 율문이 여발타부지 난거도와. 나와나지 징거와. 되는 나신이가 나신지 여러분은 되나신지 말에 요산 젠지 여러 타니도 여러 zelab고와.
So with Chimpasunam, for example, if you look at Chimpasunam existed nominally out there. However, Chimpasunam, as you perceive Chimpasunam that exists independently without dependent on anything else, there's a one entity Chimpasunam which existed on its own without depending on anything. Such Chimpasunam does not exist, but it appears to us and we perceive that. And this appearance and perceptions of we have is the one that is the wrong view, to say another word.
살살내놨더니 또서 학 개발 제도나 또서 개발 지용으로와.
If you can distinguish between these two and gain some clarity and understanding of these two, and it will make a difference in your understanding of overall selflessness nature of.
간제 벽에 개발 참보래다 이준 renda와 사케게 이런 부처게 우멜타와 또 우마 주사데 이준 renda와 그 주라 우마기 베티 주사데 다 이준 renda와 간사가 다 잘기지 거래 간사가 다 잘기지야 다데 같이 타니베 다들이 가서 가지 다데 말해 타니베 다데 여러와 이 타니다데 여 인사다 여에서디 숨고래 이런 뭐지 간사가 다 라메 잘기지 거라 다 잘기지 거 말해 된다베 다데 가르네 가지 다들이 다 이런 뭐지게 타니베 다 여러 말해서 같이디나 가설제니 뒤에서 숨고와 이런 뭐지 뒤네 타니베 다데면나 땡리기 던데 유니불레트 사다니베 차차전을 서버다 다지다 최슬 대사도 메서나 빅마르와 무슨 능용 거라.
So Jesu Rendapa was a teacher of the Lama Tsongkhapa. Lama Tsongkhapa actually received his middle way teaching of Nagarjuna mainly from Jesu Rendapa. But Jesu Rendapa, in many texts you will find he accepts the self. And whereas the Lama Tsongkhapa denies or does not accept self. And it is important to understand that when Jesu Rendapa's text, when he said that he affirms self, means he's talking about this nominally existent self. And which, if you ask Lama Tsongkhapa, if he accepts a nominally existent self, Lama Tsongkhapa will agree that he accepts that conventionally existent self, which is there. But when Lama Tsongkhapa in his writing, when he states selflessness, he is talking about the object of negation of that self, which is the true existence of that self. And if Lama Tsongkhapa denies this nominally existent self, then how can he establish the cause and effect and parts and whole? Anything that you see cause and effect and parts and wholes are there, they exist conventionally. Without that existence, he cannot establish the interdependent nature of reality and things. Things are there, nominally designated things are there, which arise from the dependent origination. So if nominally existent self is denied, then that cannot be established. So it's important to understand that they, even though in a text it may sound different, but they are meaning the same thing, but talking about two different selves. So understanding these two are important.
와다때 다들 야변 대화도 배 치설보여다. 이게는 간사가 다음에 주기 다음에 통교룰라 다 동지군이 개발제 엄마도 다배 가지군이 개발이요 말에 율충이군이 개발이요 말에 중이군이 tel경 로지 차대요라.
So, so these two selflessness, talking about selflessness of the individual or the person, and selflessness of the transitory collection of aggregates, these two different phenomena. As far as the negation is concerned, both are object of negation. There's no difference. Both are object to be negated. But the difference is the basis of the empty nature of these two. One is the selflessness of the person as an individual person, and other is the selflessness of the aggregates of the things of phenomena.
단다 개변 대화도 배 미스가 결혼소 다음에 세 매야데 간지 오분은 기전라라 말에 뺑오데 라진데 있어도가 맞은 진술이 통고 낭줄데 세운 거다 대주리도 안 가서 낭줄데라 삼단다 미간데지 미지 통나다 잘라지 통나 그 깨는 때버서 이 통금도 안 하죠 미데 통도 가라 깨는 맞아 바라고 코랑원이 연대긴지 가서 보내 통도 민도스 때 강가.
Yeah, Los. So this commentary of the Chandrakirti about the commentary of the 400 verses of Chandrakirti is important in his mention about the non-dependence on anything else. So when we look at the things and persons outside there, for us, it appears and we perceive that the person as a independently existing there without depending on anything else, cause and conditions around there. And Geshe-la asks, do you perceive, don't we perceive it like that? When you see a person there, means we perceive that person there on its own existence rather than, and there are so many cause and conditions put together to have this person in front of you, but we perceive them almost like a individual, independent existence there. Don't we perceive that? The question. There was a question Geshe-la asked last one. Don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how it appears.
Appears, and also first is appearance, and then we have perception of that, right? Within appearance through the eyes, it appears, and then perceive in the mind, and then we objectify that as solid.
And we relate to that person.
Exactly. And then you as a self entity, and this subject, and that was the question. So anybody else? And so Janice.
삼단에 두스제네 아니 소전 낭술들 자르제 두스 삼단이나 되니 살갈레그리 딱 말아서 메리 승인 pomo지 난다 다 승인지 난다 지 통용도가라 코 파말 깨와당 가서 통고 말아 코랑은 이어버리지 난 거라 그때는 맞아서 난 거도 낭용도가라 깨나 밤터버리는지 균이요 말이지 따뜻이 낭술도 가고었다 뭐니잖아.
So when you look at, for example, let's say there's the woman called Mary or the person called Doug, when we look at them, we don't perceive them as they come into being through the causes and conditions beginning from their parents, but we rather look at them as an individual right there on their own essence, existing independent there without depending. So the negation is this perception of that person existing independent. That is the object of negation.
낭줄 때왕게 다 애니 다세야다 년세야다 근데 낭줄 때왕게 온거와 차단가가.
Because of this perceptions, so then we differentiate that into friends and enemies and relatives, and all these ideas came from this perception of looking at the person out there as individually independent existent. So think about it, is it true or not? If it is not true that we don't perceive in that way, means then Buddha and Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, they're all wrong, what they have taught us.
So yes, we we definitely do that. And then, but now we're learning not to do that. So now it's sort of like both.
So Laura is soon strike Kishla did when I on the Tara Nangados and now on a shinshin and in town that Kishla and Hakon did Nangzutila and go this time or somebody Nangzuti and did nobody.
나도 때리지 매라게 어다. 뭐마데 디득이디 에 모티베이션 되게 엔땡이고다. 간지 켄레게 바테마게 시디가라. 간지 켄레게 이제 진짜지 수도도 게요 말서 수능데가라. 아주 낭줄데라 수도도 두바지 난거와. 디오 말서 까용도.
So this is what earlier stated in that Buddha's Sutra teaching that things arise from cause and condition cannot be arisen inherently. So this is the one that is negating said that there's no objective existence of the person out there other than that is our perceptions of that.
But so when I'm driving my car, I still have to behave as if there's something inherently there in front of me that I could hit if I don't stop the car. But I know that it doesn't inherently exist, but it exists relatively, and I've got to stop the car.
Exactly, yeah. And Krishna, the Lord, the Nisums, Moratan, Dukalta, Moratan, Dugua, the Kala Motage to you, and the Moratilla Tantika Samotan, the now Shari the Kala Moranga Nawala, and it Ranshingi, Meo Yomara, Morade, Yomarate, in a Samu Tantukala, and Ranshingi Meo Dajina, Kunzup Yovatilla, Salomatanga, and it, yeah, Katumara, something, Kunzup Yovati.
Did the Tendel check way using the Terwa. Tendel get Karsa, Mazu Umata Shera Niera. Kanga Tomba Niro, tell a Tangerung Guru, the Sumdua. Tongi Jineji Yahoshi Chevaina, telling us tiny Gichacho Kangan Joshi Grace Sure. That gets him more dignity.
Kanga Tenju Garline,
Kanga Tomba Niro, tell a Tangerung Gurus.
Tomba Yin
Oh, Tomba Nedi Yahoshi Chevaina. Any tiny Tendelgin de shit, pet, Machin Joshi Grace Sumwar.
Kishla is affirming Laura that is true, and that's why it is important to understand the dependent originations, that things are dependent, but things there, but it's dependently originated, it's not independent there. And Nagarjuna has stated that once who realized and understood the emptiness, then he understood the dependent nature, interdependent nature of the things there. So things exist as dependently existent things out there, but they don't exist objectively or independently.
Messiade Rajin Mepa Gacha Tutu Yobaji, Mozo Nangor, Rajin Giobaji, Peggy, Yulmuni Yobaji Nangore, Temes Lago Mato, Zundala Soba Meze Lago Mara.
So what is negating is this inherent existence or independent existence. We are not negating the nominally or dependently originated, designated person or things. That's not the negation. Negation is the inherent existence or independent existence of that.
Pachak Diga Junjune Kazangaman Roson. That Takadulati Gurmatuna Kaki Yomare. Chidar Tonde Shebata, Dininga Prachamintes, Dini Dungal, you give them Bartobangaja insert, them Bartobas, them Bartuba. Mazut Migi Tonde the Tonga the Toyagi, Tizukago Mares, Chidar Tonde Shebata, Dininga Prachamintes. Dini Dungal you give. Mazo you're going about Zin and Nade Denzin Tigi, Dungal Gigores. Can't Dinzingi used to give number topa de, number two de, take a go or motto. Mean Tonte Sheba, you said the cargo or Martha Sungdua. Junju Korana Sungdua.
It is stated in Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life, that and all the senses. The sense faculty that we perceive, the sounds and things and that appear to us, those are not the object of negation. They are there. But what is negating is that is stated very clearly that these objects, that sounds we hear and things we see, these are not to be negated. They are there. But what caused the suffering to us is that when we perceive these as an independent existence, inherently existence, without depending on cause and conditions, what we hear, sound, everything. Once you understood that anything that we perceive or through sense faculty, these are again have a cause and conditions. They're dependently originated. They don't have its own objective existence. So that is the point of negating. That is what we are rejecting.
Chigi Ronyoya, Tezo, Kagio Mardas, Dininga Perchamintes. Dini Lungal Gurgu, Zemberto Bangachins, Lungal Gigu and it Maripa, then the Maripatiki, paying also Nang, you want to pay Sutu Nangiore, Tendich Togo, the Tenda with Topa Chinchirote, Kayare mother, Lungal you give a Topa Chinchilla, the Kayare mother, pay Yosemite Kagio Marzes, the penning to do.
So Geshe-la is repeating what you said earlier, that and the line from the Bodhisattva Way of Life by Shantideva, that and the sense faculty that we hear and sees things, and these are not the object to be rejected or negated or denied, and the true existence of these things, and that is the one that to be negated. That is the cause of the sufferings. So if you look at understood, that means then you have the beauty of these lines can be understood if you understood this line from this context. I've sent these lines to you earlier. It is very beneficial if you just reflect on these and read these and introspect on these lines. This nominally existent self, it can be understood well by studying and reflect upon the dependent originations and the subtle existence of the self nominally. Even that it is not easy to understand.
Anchi, tondang mumade, tongil telen bayade, macho nang yundugona, sudu pagi yulungoni yoba, tendiji nang yundugala, digita takarso, nyumung kiagi kendi tiki ching gorwa, chadang kiagi kendi.
The source of affliction and our ignorance and the delusion is perceiving things and phenomena as a true existence through its own essence without being imputed upon that power of our thought.
Tedanta tonda chikpa chigyang tanda di junju chi dedang. Zashi dijin chi de tonda chikpa chigyang. Te mai ma ngi sopatonde me chi jen kurya. Te tonda chikpa chigyang. Ranjin yeme cholwa yinkis. Ta chepa che yundugala ranjin ki tu matu dembar dembar yeme pa chepa chidugala ranjin ki tu matu de chego mata yeme sulgu amares. Chepachiki omare, yobata jijarwa, tiny to yorwa. Mebata ko Rivon Radala Sobananga metal sobatet could Jimotu inza, Messi could Mebata Mopocha, Suchi Chepachiki omarte, you met Kachiki omares. Rajin you mengas, Nang Yondugala, Nanganaji, you meti, Tati Nangzul de la Nang Najin do me to Tati Chigores.
In the similar lines that Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on Nagarjuna's middle way Molakarika Madhyamaga. And this Lama Tsongkhapa has again established in a similar line as in a Bodhisattva way of life, that what we perceive as a true existence, which is the one that is the things that we have to understand to be negated. But things that appearance itself is not the object of negation. And sorry, it's not about, it's not about, we're not looking at exist or non-existent as such here. It's just nominally their existence, inherently not existence. But what we are looking at, so for example, something that the rabbits with the hair, which is not existent. We know that, we can intellectually think about that, but it doesn't exist. But here is, we're not looking at that context. Here we look at is non-existent, means true existence of the self as independent. That is the one that we have to understand. Nominally or designatedly existent things that exist there, but it's a true existence. That is the one that we have to understood. So such a self that cannot be found when we search and through a critical examination. So this lack of this true existence is the one that is selflessness, that cannot be found through a thorough investigations. The lack of that existence comes from there. That understanding is through examination. So it is not saying that it does not exist at all. It is saying that it does not exist as a true independent existence. So it is, if you understood this clearly, and then you will understand. Is it helping you with this explanation? Krishna is asking a question.
Yes.
Laura, do this. Krishna.
That's so.
Yani dobada zukamina daji pumbu ngala ta tenita zubeina daji pumbu jila tenita zeta teniji ta sha gejida ngajila ani kaza sigorwa.
So this in a Prasangaga system, this self or the I, and what is this? How do we designate that I? This designated self or mere I is nominally imputed to the transitory collection of the 5 aggregates. So that is the one that we call the I, that which is a nominally existent I. In this I is not an independent existent I, but I rather projected by mind to the collection of these 5 aggregates. This is the emerging properties to which we impute or imputed to these 5 aggregates.
Rangwezede sududu duba yurngun duba diko di jargora rangwe mekyang mingda ve pa ta samji tumdegenji sigorda rangwe mekyang mingde parda las
parda las tarare
tarare.
So omniscient giant Shepa has stated that although things do not have their own essence, but we project the identity to the things through our mind.
Rangwen mesidugal yulngwen me ta tanyidu me da kaji sigo marta. 가칭은이 양대 고고래.
So here, although things does not exist, is that again you have to understood this in an independent existence on its own.
가칭은이 파요 요 말데 파 따점지 초선을 때라 따점지 자와 강같이 둥근데라다 당이도 간사 세야돼 차거라.
Although things do not exist independently, but collectively through dependent on other things, things exist, and that through which the things and persons function. There's a functionality of the things and person come from the collection of all these put together, these transitory collections together, and that thing or that self is the nominally existent self.
보다 풍봉하잖아 다 하고라. 저기 분부스러워 보면 뒤지게 보면 나버시 풍봉아 초점질라 애니 강사 세대 다 되기.
So you know the five aggregates. These are the five aggregate is the body form and the feelings and perceptions and that's the and then and the consciousness, and consciousness, all these put together. So these five factors, five aggregates put together, and then there comes this, we project collection of these together as a self or I or the person.
다 염천버지라 풍봉하대 낭펀준 가와래. 대 초점질라 강사 세대 딱 거래. 염천버지도
Kandes punzungat kares?
풍봉 낭펀준 가와래. 풍봉하대
Galbalana kare.
갈와.
Kandes
컨디션 차디어래.
Yeah. So if you look at individually each aggregates of these five aggregates, they are not really, they are contradicting or they're not same, but when they put together in a collection and they emerge a concept of I.
디니다 강사되게 따샤들한테 강사되게 자와 차상지 두고 가래.
So when this I or this person or this self has been designated, and this designated self do all kind of things, all the things that we do, everything.
어다들 다 된다고 강사대 동지체네 대선다 라지메 바투겐데라 강사가 다음에 다 풍부다 다 최시대 랑기 온지 마 소소소소 오만아 말을 최이나 베티부투 오 만다여라 가와 오 만다여라 저지 오 만다여라 랑기 오 소손 진진제 영인지라 최시시거라 랑기 온지 마 추기 진이래 어다 땡이들가 최저다다 풍소라 서바이니 베 징하는서 나지치 가리네 대소 강가라 고고고래.
So the selflessness of the person is this lack of independent existence of this person as a self, and that is the selflessness of the person understood in that way. Whereas the phenomena here, it is we are talking about collection of the things put together, and that exists into an entity. For example, the bell exists as a composition of different factors put together, has a bell, and table exists as a designated table or labeled as table, or nominally exists as a table due to the different parts of the table. And similarly, the beams and pillars, these all entities have their own compositions and put together, and aggregate of these composition together exists nominally as the phenomena of the entities.
와다더니 인디가라 강사가 다음에 지금 지진지 또 봐라. 주기 다음에 또 봉문도 누구 거래지. 주기 다음에 또 양다 봐지 마다 봐도 강사가 다음에 지금 지진지 또 두 말에서 순 거래.
In order to understand this selflessness of the person, first you have to understand the selflessness of the phenomena and the external phenomena, which is the composition of different aggregates, different parts.
되게 첨버렸다. 다들 규정 원해요. 다들 다 삼로당당 하고 그래. 삼로당하면 가사가 남에 지진 돌라 주기 다음에 또 할까. 지진 맛 주기 다음에 맞도나 가사가 다음에 또 먹고 규정 가르는도 삼로당하다. 되네 하고 그래.
So think carefully, think with analysis, think with an examination, that why it is important first to understand the selflessness of the phenomena, to understand the selflessness of the person, why this categorically in order is why it is important first to understand and the selflessness of the phenomena and to understand this selflessness of the person. So in the next session when we meet, I'm going to ask you this question, why that is. This is the homework for you, to that why it is important first to understand the selflessness of the phenomena. So that understanding can help you to understand the selflessness of the person at a deeper level or more profound way. The object of negation, there's no difference between these two. Both are to be negated. That is that they don't exist inherently, neither one of them. So this self as a person is, as said earlier, that it is the collection of the five aggregates put together, and then it arises the idea that self exists, and that self. Whereas the understanding that, now you have to understand why it is important to understand the selflessness of the phenomena, to understand this selflessness of the person.
Yeah, that ring tendency general. Ngapa tata da karma chonga jikena to develop dana.
So let's stop here today. It's almost 5 o'clock. We have nearly 15 minutes left. And if you have any questions, we can leave the remaining time for Q&A.
I have a question about studying the four tenets. It's actually a pretty simple question. At least I think it is. Is it important to take a very long time studying each independent tenet individually and then meditating on each tenet, or do we just meditate on emptiness? Like,
sorry, what are the four tenets you're talking about?
Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, the four schools, or I guess they call it four tenets sometimes.
Okay.
Is it important that we also, after studying each school, have do meditation sessions on that specific school to pick apart the flaws and the merits?
Okay. Yeah. Disla Jason Gitubadirisha Monzo that Nangwe Tatu Shishu and Dugala and Cheramawata, Dotebata, Semtamba, and Umashigi Orwa, and Dikala Samotans, Hisla Sungra, and Korasamutang Galani, and Tower Rail, some of the Tower del Congress, that is Kian Karatu, look at the Penjirama, the Tower Ibrajirama, the Congress, Comche, and Kian Kartu, the Tower, and discover some of the combination.
Home to Nata Yaksharo, Tambo, Ko, Chirama, Tower the Kijusunding is Ame Paterwa. Timothy Loli Chugi Yomar, Zamera Pachimado. Then telling the Batayora. The Debalescence and Batayore. Tizu, the Yanda Bashevina, Tini, Tizugi, Omil Tower the Yaku Shena, Comil Tower Shell, Hindu water, Omil Tower, Cometic Sersunde, Ticks in the Batik.
No, takes about it. Yeah. So if you could, it is good to practice and meditate on each one of them. So starting with Vaishashika, Vaishashika's selflessness is focused primarily on three factors. There is more subtle, more growth. They deny the independent, permanent, and unitary self that exists. So that kind of self they denied. And so whereas Swatantrika goes a little deeper than that, they have self this much deeper. And as you go from from there to Chittamatra, and from the mind only, and then to Madhyamaka. So each school's thought, each school's philosophy, metaphysics view is used as to go forward as a step to the next. So you can start with the Vaishashika school of thought and then meditate upon it. And then you have that realized, understood that, and then go to the next means then you understood the next, okay, there is a one more step to go in there. And then if you just each one is used as a step to go forward.
Thank you.
So in our daily lives, what would be the result? What would be the difference between our experience now and what our experience would be if we were able to relate to other people as being the result of causes and conditions? Mm-hmm. I mean, I kind of gathered that we would, if we could see that way, we would be more virtuous in our activities. But I'm just trying to wrap my head around what that experience would be like. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Kishla Janice Kitiba Dirisha, Tangonzo Kesi ta the Kansa Shimbachi Mishinchi President Tidi, Ranshin to Mabati Komshiro, or Ranshin to Yomava, the Komshin Nanguche, Samotang and Dugala, Monzola, the Susu, Yemen, Yirin, Payan Karim Gres, the Payan Chige. The bio thing depend on how good the bio thing or the mother Shimba Turwing when he got a pingress so the Gerlata, Pagadi, Ranshime, the Totsana, Suzuki, Yamyong the Tony, that on Sorbatica, and they pingre, and let you grass.
But Tonda Chambush to Yungro, Karzan, Ko Rajim Betawa the Shivaina Ko. Yulungweni sududu maruba shivena kwe sangin karaji labina semla tanda ngazo be michigi titubji labina sem be machoba jingudwa ko a teta ta koran be shetan norde teta ndema mare samsamji susuna diondigala teso semla kangal teso shira chung rugure gyaja gyata ma rugure kare ina 아니 수수 때도 때도 냠도 도동 장주 있습니다. 니지 콤파요이나 텔레기 락퍼도 때 세와치기로 와. 아니 단도가 가서 레탕보바 이나 또는 렘상 아주 단진다 때네베 슈 춤보 인데가라 네갑지 코나양 양교로 쟁엔 왕도로 냐가 알아. 고 디제디가라 디줄라 다 따동 아주 레탕보가 삼단다다 아마 여름이 승대가라 네티 대대 용사 말에 선선지 계속해서 먹고 있어요. 민라다지나 다되게 다된 가서 대반대바다 동안 믿어 집어치기를 되어와. 그 가서 지주라이나 견견이 가르치기나 창두야 가르치기나 되게 그 녀몽이 견러와. 이때는 녀몽이 소식길인데도 소세 따가란 찍기도 와. 삼타나 미주 삼바데 죽은 교바케 중도 녀몽이 견러마도 미드기 좀 말와 다들 하고라 액터의 액션 배 제법보다 자와의 제법이 인제 땅 두가 맞아 자와의 제법이 찍도 투는데 거로 망체 반다버도 자와의 제법이 수순 제투야 또 미스베게 침버리도 아마 여름이 담보 숨도가라 대대용 사마르선가 꼰조 숨 삼시에도 드네 삼르다 아우 다들 레데르는데 이나 또서 가보도 두가 맞아 로콤베 왕기.
So it will make a big difference if you look at this way, that if you are able to think in that way, that the person doesn't exist inherently, independently there, means if that person used you a harsh word or abusive word, it won't hurt you as much. You will not suffer as much. You are thinking that this is the cause and condition. There's no one individual existed there who's doing that to you. And then if you're able to look at means your suffering will be less, far less, your pain about hearing that. We often get hurt by words. The words cannot hurt you if you are able to see that. And when His Holiness have taught these, and Geshe-la is referring himself, and that I could not, I thought that I wouldn't be able to do that. That was a really difficult thing to think, that if somebody, the enemy is to perceive that. But however, through really dedication, I have been trying, and it does make a difference. It's still, I still have a difficulty sometimes, but it does make a huge difference. And if we are able to look at that, means we know that all the feelings that hurt that we feel when being abused, hurled at us, it is not that person, rather than our own mind that is occurring. That is the hurt. Hurt is your own mind, which is creating. How does that irritate us? That we're perceiving that person as the independent existing, and then we're perceiving that word that hurt you as a really like a solid word that is hurting you. And that thought itself, then if you realize that it's your own mind rather than that person is hurting you, this is your own affliction and your ignorance of that own thing that hurt you. But moment that ignorance is gone, means all of a sudden you will realize that there's no hurt from this word, because word cannot hurt you. The word hurts you because you perceive that as a real solid. And then on top of that, if you can still use the bodhicitta along with this understanding, you will feel a lot of compassion to that person. And that way you can develop compassion, because you understood that it doesn't, but at the same time, you understood that the person who's hurling at you, he doesn't see that way. That's why he, in his own way, is really like rigidly thinking that you exist as an independent person and hurling that. And then your understanding combined with the compassion, bodhicitta will really, a genuine compassion will occur to the person who is using those language to you. So it definitely will help if you're able to think in that way.
The Jikapsiri Pater Yore. Tupi Nyumon Razi Yang, Nyumon Tangdel Kanza means it. That Jebaba the Jawing Kabarjigwa, that it's Tinitungare.
Yeah, I just
Nyumon Razi.
Yeah, Geshe-la, so sorry, I just forgot one translation there. Geshe-la mentioned about actor and actions. So it is important for us to look at the action and actors. We have thing action and actor. The actor is there, action is there, they're at the same. But if you look at that, the action and actors are not really in a different way. It's a different. There's action, there's actors. So you have to be able to separate these two.
That to be Nyumon Razigang, Nyumon Tangdel Kanza means Tapai to be Nyumon Lekundul Tagrimado, Kanzala pe Danzu the Tenichik Mares, Kanzala Kundul Tagmares Sundua. The Indigla, Nyumon Digi Genji the Kundelegura, Javade. Chepapula pe Turum Lakpart Nijumura. You go use on the machine, Maripongati, Yungurwa.
So in 400 verses, Aryadeva has stated that the difference between the action and actor here, one who Buddha will not Nyumon
Razi Gangs.
Nyumon
Nyumon Deva in the Kazatala Marais. Nyumon Tangdel Kaza means.
Trust the enemies. Okay, so Buddha said that the person, the individual person is not your enemy, but his affliction. The affliction is the enemy. His ignorance and affliction is the enemy. If you are able to separate these two, then you will see that you will have developed compassion. The person's doing out of ignorance and affliction. The affliction is the one that causing it, not the individual person there.
Yarumji Lung the Tane de Sundigalanga, Narata, Tata Kepse, Chanju Seva, the Yarumji, the Chanju Seva, the Ingrid, to Samara Samjunta Tamponi.
When His Holiness Dalai Lama read this text and explained this text, and at that time I was thinking that the Bodhisattva like His Holiness and Bodhisattvas, they can do this, not me. I wouldn't be able to do it that time, I thought. And I almost resigned myself to give up almost.
Teni kyarumje sungla luani yo mare tegala papalage teni pe kebama busungre te gizengi gire sande samdande teni jeni tatengone gizendu samsamje yongudwa ina yangaran so nyomongla kompa chambo yendugala 직 mandi de lam sang lung tanya de yongudwa tako nonen 적은 로로 달람 sang panduye yo marwa.
So having trust in Aryadeva and His Holiness Dalai Lama that they cannot be lying on these, and then start thinking on this more deeply, reflecting on these teachings over and over. And with that, just suddenly my own anger and everything declines. But due to our habits of many lifetimes, it does occur from time to time. It still occurs, the angers and all the negative emotion. But in the reflecting on these, it suddenly helps in reducing it when in the moment when it occurs.
samtang wa de be ge chimborsha samtang na kogi yung legido sammadana tita tangpun samata de tangpun ta be susugi pa te tu samare sande ta karze yilu bilelo wandu do sharo.
So if you reflect on it, you will be able to do it. But if you resign yourself out of laziness from the beginning, set thinking that you could not do it, and then you will not be able to do it. But if you really reflect on this over and over repeatedly, and then you will realize that the transformation happens.
See this also chikti samdang lozin yani ando samdang na lozin na ko samdang yongudo.
So it's a good idea to memorize some of these important lines. If you memorize means, then you will be able to reflect on these lines more and more. And so without relying on books, so in a different location, different places, you can reflect on this more often if you memorize these lines.
Tengone yabodo tupe nyomon daze kyang nyomon tangdel kanza min sidigala chikhebarjin je yongudo.
So this line is, if you read this line again, is that the Buddha will not treat the individual as the enemy, but rather the affliction, the ignorance of that individual as the enemy.
Watate su kagurna sosu ming di tin chugche nge ni nyomon dal tagi mado nyomon de kansala dal tagi men sidel tu suje samtana te lo kombe ngana kombal kang la komna lor ma kidung de ko yo ma insura komna le la bochagra ma ko ma te komba ma komma jona te khabur de jasha ne khaburan de chagra.
So you can turn it to yourself and relate it to yourself, thinking that in someone else there, in this person, you think that that person is not the enemy, but rather his ignorance and his affliction is the enemy. So it just reflect more on that, introspect more on that, and think deeper on that, means then things will happen. Otherwise, if you don't familiarize yourself with these ideas, these thoughts, then it will be just remain there, no changes will happen, just like if you leave a cup on the table and stay there without moving.
Kajaka kazuji to sujene samdana semla kazuji semding gyurje tanglo yade nangba sangye bita tundangwa ma de sem gyurje tangye sungorta.
So reflecting on these, and the gist of the Buddha's teaching is the transformation of the mind, changes in the mind.
Sem gyurje in roala ta tangpo samdana gyurwan rogudo.
So to transform your mind, you have to start changes in your way you think.
자상아저 최세 세더 가지 간즉 gyurwa tangsan데 tablamde sunguarwa. Shede tirwa.
So all the teachings really focus on the way to change mind, how we can tame our mind and change our mind. And the whole teaching of the Buddha is focused on that transformation of the mind.
간제데 samdandal to sunguate any base ranching down, then toss Ngamatala shoot toss Nurun Rugana, chain Yembe Cochobare. That Chipachikan Charles on a tea that Davondavore, Nyamba the Manyam Bagila. Tanyembis
After,
Payinjini Giro Maupana.
after receiving teaching, you can assess yourself by looking at whether you are a self-cherishing mind and looking at things as a true existence. Have they reduced, have become less? If they have become less, means then you have benefited from the teaching. If they have not become less, then it is just about the same as listening or not listening to teaching, receiving or not receiving teaching. It might benefit you some way in for some form, but not really. There's no direct changes or transformation.
Well, that is it. That
So
is
that's-
also.
So that's about it. Now is time is up.
But what's the share is June the Jigot Saborta, Karanzo Yaniando, some Facebook and Rolindi Chenepe Abore.
So this is a teaching, is a lot of depth and difficult subject. And it is, if you could form a group discussions on Facebook to discuss on this, debate on this, and have a dialogue on this, it will be very beneficial.
Yeah.
I have one announcement. And next week, I will not be able to translate. I apologize. I have a commitment.
Take care of Martis.
Mhm.
That Karanzo the Injimiji Katina Kanchin Dabandabure, also Shen Yams Malana, Mashapat and Dabro Mapen. Kajit is a Tuntunjina Shene, the Tonanche, the Yana and the Jana, Tanda didn't shake your city, Lokashi in La Samatana Mado, Tunda Jimachin share Kabureta.
Mhm. So reflecting on these teachings is really important. What you have received teaching today, if you spend a time and reflecting on that, means the benefits of this receiving the teachers may come few years later, may not be right away. But if you don't reflect on it, means there was no beneficial at all. But the constant reflection, it is important.
What's Yangan says, Tijura, Yang said. Ni Jinging, Yang days the Tangazo, did you Tangeta Yangan the Numology Sekanare. Tanga Judy, Seven Chuma son Yangan the Numology. Tangazo Yangan the Dungal Segora, the Manche, the good Gora.
Mhm.
That they cut in as a bad. Lord Judan is some dinda. Did you go ying is just ying it Sungatala Gavata Kari, so Lula Matsubara? No Mabusan, Yang Yomoncho than Wonderwa. Yangan said the Dungal gets minji, Dungal de Yomon Tenjin Yongor Mado, Tenjin in the Yomoredo, Tartusade. The Dilin day in some young days, the mares are in some young days.
So,
Munaquachamoda, low mambo some dango.
mhm.
That's what the Lila Chugno, Kaja Pajangambe mo, Joa Toma member Pajangamba Condeoro. She a cover.
So when my teacher first explained me about the suffering, and my teacher said that suffering in the Tibetan word is a nyangel. So nyangel, nyang matangonyel nyangeche, and nyangel dewa chera. So suffering, nyangel means suffering. And my teacher told me that nyangel or suffering means affliction or the negative emotion. And at that time, I was unable to understand completely that how is the difference? Suffering is a suffering as of we really pain and suffering, but whereas the affliction can be of a wide range, some of them even the desire that could be part of the affliction, right? So it took me really 10 years to thinking on that, reflecting on that, and I knew that I have a trust on my teacher. But when I reflected now, I understood that the suffering and afflictions are two and at the same thing, because the affliction causes suffering. And then nyangde means it transcends the affliction or the suffering. So nyangde or nirvana in Sanskrit, it is a free from that suffering or free from affliction. So if you can look at your affliction and the suffering at the same, you will see that they are not different. They are the one and others, one cause and one effect, or one, causes the other. So it took me a long time to reflect deeply on that, and to finally to have a really deeper understanding of this word, and able to distinguish between these things and what we see from the word nirvana, or the ultimate, the free from the suffering.
Yeah. Chanchu Sencho Rinpoche, Maki Bama Gingirji, Gawa Nyamba, Mebaya, Kone Kondo, Pewara, so Kanji Rawe, Kuru Jinkamta, Pendant Deva, Malinju, Cherezi on Tindin Gatsui, Jabe Sike Bato, Dengi, Jamba Bawa, Children Kimba, Kundo Zampo, Teda Kunyeji Sodala, Bewa Nida, Tamja Ratum, Tusum Shebi Gawa, Tamja King, Gangla Chodom.
Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. In the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit flows in your person, Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.
Oh yeah, thank you, Dachi.
Thank you, everyone.
Dachi.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Geshe-la.
Thank you. Yeah.